Welcome to today's episode of Civilizations Uncovered, where we journey through time to uncover the most extraordinary story ever told. The epic tale of how a small group of early humans transformed from scattered bands of survivors into the founders of every civilization on Earth. Picture this. It's 70,000 years ago. You're standing on the shores of the Red Sea, watching a handful of desperate humans, maybe just a few hundred souls preparing to cross into an unknown world. These aren't the confident explorers we might imagine. They're survivors, driven by climate catastrophe, carrying nothing but primitive stone tools and an unshakable determination to live. What they do and know is that they're about to begin the most consequential journey in human history. Behind them lies Africa, where their species, Homo sapiens, first emerged around 300,000 years ago. Ahead lies an empty planet populated by other human species, Neanderthals in Europe, mysterious Denisovans in Asia, and strange hobbit humans on distant islands. But within just 50,000 years, these early migrants and their descendants would colonize every habitable continent, outlive every other human species, and create the foundation for every city, every language, and every culture that exists today. How did they do it? What drove them from their African homeland to risk everything in uncharted territories? And perhaps most remarkably, how did scattered groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers ultimately give rise to the world's first cities, the birth of agriculture, and the dawn of human civilization itself? The story begins with climate, not the gradual warming we know today, but dramatic swings that created green corridors between continents every 20,000 years, opening brief windows of opportunity that determined the fate of our species. It involves false starts and ghost populations, entire groups of early humans who made it to Asia and Europe only to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only fragments of DNA in our modern genomes. But this isn't just a story about migration. It's about the moment everything changed, when humans first decided to stop moving and build permanent communities, fundamentally altering human psychology and setting the stage for agriculture, cities, and civilization itself. This decision, made around 12,000 years ago, would transform small nomadic bands into settled societies, leading to the first farms, the first cities, and ultimately, the complex world we inhabit today. The evidence for this incredible journey comes from the most unlikely places: caves in South Africa, where 164,000-year-old humans created the first symbolic art. Remote caverns in Laos containing 70,000-year-old bones of the first Asians, and ancient settlement mounds that reveal the birth of the world's first cities. Each discovery rewrites our understanding of who we are and how we came to dominate this planet. Today, we'll follow in their footsteps across continents and through millennia, from the scorching deserts of Africa to the frozen shores of ancient land bridges, from the first spark of fire to the rise of empires. We'll discover how language became humanity's ultimate weapon, how agriculture changed everything, and how the descendants of those first brave migrants built the foundations of the modern world. This is the story of us, how a single species spread across the globe and created civilization itself. It's a tale of survival, innovation, and the unstoppable human spirit that continues to shape our world today. Chapter 1. The Great Migration begins. The scorching wind carries the scent of death across the dried lake beds of eastern Africa, where lush grasslands once supported herds of antelope and our ancestors for thousands of years. Now only cracked earth and scattered bones remain. The year is 70,000 BCE, and the climate has turned against humanity with devastating force. The once reliable rains have failed, the rivers have dried to dust, and the game has vanished or died. For the scattered bands of Homo sapiens clinging to survival in this harsh landscape, a terrible choice looms: adapt to a world that seems determined to kill them, or venture into the complete unknown. You are witnessing the most critical moment in human history. the point where our species either faces extinction or takes the first steps toward global dominance. The decision these early humans are about to make will determine whether future generations will build pyramids and skyscrapers, or whether our species joins the countless others that vanished without a trace. This is where the great human migration begins, not with conquest or exploration, but with desperation and an unbreakable will to survive. The Africa of 70,000 years ago bears little resemblance to the continent we know today. For 200,000 to 125,000 years ago, Eastern Africa enjoyed a relatively wet climate with at least 20 to 30% more precipitation than the region receives today, meaning conditions were favorable for early humans with plenty of food and water available. Rivers flowed year-round, vast lakes dotted the landscape, and savannas teemed with life. Our ancestors thrived in this African Eden, developing sophisticated hunting strategies, creating the world's first symbolic art, and establishing complex social structures that would later become the foundation of human civilization. But around 125,000 years ago, everything began to change. Tierney and her colleagues found that around 70,000 years ago, climate in the Horn of Africa shifted from a wet phase called Green Sahara to even drier than the region is now. The region also became colder. This wasn't a gradual shift. It was a climatic catastrophe that transformed the landscape with shocking speed. Lake beds that had supported life for millennia turned to salt flats. Rivers that had carved deep valleys through the rock simply stopped flowing. The abundant wildlife that had made hunting relatively easy either migrated to distant lands or perished entirely. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of a species pushed to the very edge of extinction. One possibility occurred 70,000 years ago, when the Toba supervolcano erupted in Indonesia and triggered a nuclear winter that fewer than 15,000 individuals survived. While scientists debate whether the Toba eruption was the primary cause, they agree that human populations plummeted to dangerously low levels. The scientists estimate that there would have only been an effective population size of around 1,280 individuals between 930,000 and 813,000 years ago, suggesting the presence of a bottleneck. Though this particular bottleneck occurred much earlier, it illustrates just how precarious human existence had always been. The climate crisis that gripped Africa 70,000 years ago wasn't random. It was part of a larger pattern driven by astronomical forces beyond human comprehension. But the window that opened around 70,000 years ago was different from those that came before. This time, the climate crisis was so severe that staying in Africa meant almost certain death for many groups. As Jessica Tierney, a University of Arizona geoscientist, explains, perhaps people left because the environment was deteriorating. There was a big shift to dry, and that could have been a motivating force for migration. This wasn't exploration, it was evacuation. The humans preparing to leave Africa weren't a single coordinated expedition. They were small, desperate groups scattered across the continent, each making the same impossible calculation. Risk everything on a journey into the unknown, or watch their families slowly starve. The number of migrants from the south was probably not very large, as reflected in the present-day frequencies of LO in Eastern Africa of 5 to 15% on average. Technologies and culture are readily transmitted horizontally, and a relatively minor genetic influx involving several thousand individuals at most may have sufficed to transmit the cultural innovations to Eastern Africans approximately 70 to 60 Ch. These weren't the technologically advanced humans we might imagine. They possessed no maps, no written language, and no metal tools. Their technology consisted of carefully crafted stone implements, wooden spears hardened in fire, and an intimate knowledge of animal behavior passed down through generations. Yet they possessed something infinitely more valuable: the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of thousands of years of human experience. encoded in stories, songs, and survival strategies that had kept our species alive through previous crises. The route that lay before them was forbidding beyond imagination. The extensive arid environments of northern Africa and the Middle East were a major barrier blocking movement out of Africa. Before they could spread out of Africa, our ancestors needed to develop physical and mental capabilities that would enable them to survive in these harsh environments, where food and fresh water were highly seasonal resources. They would have to cross the Sahara Desert, navigate the treacherous coastlines of the Red Sea, and survive in landscapes where a single mistake could doom an entire group. Yet the climate crisis that was driving them from Africa was simultaneously creating the very conditions that made escape possible. With the growth of lush grasses and shrubs, the expansion of animals and early humans out of Africa became possible. If you imagine savanna biomes, they're perfect for herbivores such as cattle, oryx, and other four-hooved animals, explains Petraglia. They migrate in those situations and eat off the grasslands. And then, of course, you have standing freshwater and aquatic resources in freshwater lakes. The same orbital mechanics that had devastated Africa were creating green corridors through previously impassable deserts. The psychological transformation required for this journey was as profound as the physical challenges. For hundreds of thousands of years, human ancestors had been bound to familiar territories, following seasonal patterns established over countless generations. Now, survival demanded that they abandon everything they knew and trust their lives to lands they had never seen. This decision represents one of the most remarkable acts of courage in human history, a collective leap of faith that would forever change the trajectory of our species. As these first migrants gathered their meager possessions and gazed toward the horizon, they carried with them more than just their tools and families. They bore the complete genetic heritage of modern humanity, the cultural knowledge that would seed civilizations on distant continents, and the indomitable human spirit that refuses to surrender in the face of impossible odds. They didn't know they were making history. They were simply trying to survive another day. The Great Migration was about to begin, and with it, the transformation of a small, endangered African species into the dominant force on planet Earth. Chapter 2. Out of Africa. The morning sun rises over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, painting the waters of the Red Sea in shades of gold and crimson. Standing on the eastern shore of Africa, a small group of early humans gazes across the narrow channel toward the Arabian Peninsula. The distance seems impossible, 20 kilometers of open water stretching to an unknown shore. Yet for these desperate survivors, this treacherous crossing represents their only hope of escaping the dying landscape behind them. They are about to attempt something that will change the course of human history, the first successful migration out of Africa. These pioneers don't look like the confident explorers we might imagine. They're gone from months of searching for food in an increasingly barren homeland, their tools worn smooth from constant use, their numbers pitifully small. It has been estimated that from a population of 2,000 to 5,000 individuals in Africa, only a small group, possibly as few as 150 to 1,000 people, cross the Red Sea. What they lack in numbers, however, they make up for in determination and an extraordinary collection of survival skills that their species has been developing for hundreds of thousands of years. The Arabia they're preparing to enter bears no resemblance to the scorching desert we know today. Thanks to the same climate cycles that devastated their African homeland, the Arabian Peninsula has been transformed into a green paradise. The remains of ancient lakes have been found, including a very interesting site known as Kal Amation 4, Kam-4, in the Nefud Desert. It shows that the conditions were right for permanent freshwater lakes to exist in the region at least 5 times between 400,000 and 55,000 years ago. Where endless sand dunes stretch today, lush savannas and grasslands await these first travelers, dotted with freshwater lakes and teeming with game. But first, they must survive the crossing. Today, at the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, the Red Sea is about 20 kilometers, 12 miles wide. But 50,000 years ago, sea levels were 70 meters, 230 feet lower owing to glaciation, and the water channel was much narrower. Though the straits were never completely closed, they were narrow enough to have enabled crossing using simple rafts, and there may have been islands in between. These early humans possessed no sophisticated boats. Their vessels are crude rafts of bundled reeds and logs, held together with plant fibers and animal sinew. Their vessels would have needed to be solidly built to survive such a journey and packed with enough food and water for its passengers. The crossing itself is a nightmare of exhaustion, dehydration, and constant fear. Agents on water lose a basic amount of 62.5 energy units per hour, corresponding to 1,500 energy units per day, and can only survive for 30 days on water patches under optimal conditions. But these aren't optimal conditions. The travelers face the additional challenge of thermoregulation in the water, exposure to salt spray that accelerates dehydration, and the constant threat of storms that could destroy their fragile craft in minutes. In the literature, the estimated survival time without a supply of fresh water is on average 100 hours, approximately 4 days. Yet somehow, impossibly, some of them make it. The first human feet to touch Arabian soil belong to people who have risked everything on a journey their ancestors could never have imagined. These survivors represent the complete genetic foundation of every human population outside Africa. Their descendants will populate Europe, Asia, Australia, and eventually the Americas. Every city that will ever be built, every scientific discovery that will ever be made, every work of art that will ever be created by non-African populations, all of it traces back to this small group of desperate refugees who somehow found the courage to cross an ocean on primitive rafts. The Arabia they discover exceeds their wildest hopes. Research conducted in northern Saudi Arabia provided evidence of a vast network of rivers and lakes that once existed in the region. This network allowed humans to access a lush Nefa desert characterized by savannas and grasslands. Where their African homeland offered only death and starvation, this new land provides abundant fresh water, plentiful game, and edible plants they recognize from their ancestral memories. The lakes aren't just sources of water, they're oases of life, supporting vast herds of animals and creating the perfect conditions for human settlement. But survival in this new world demands more than just finding food and water. These early migrants must adapt to environments and challenges completely unlike anything their species has ever faced. They encounter new diseases, unfamiliar predators, and weather patterns that don't match the seasonal rhythms encoded in their cultural knowledge. Most critically, they must learn to navigate without the familiar landmarks and seasonal cues that had guided their ancestors for countless generations. The tools they carry tell the story of their African origins. Ancient tools point to early human migration into Arabia shows that stone tools discovered in Oman at sites dating to 106,000 years ago bear striking similarities to the Nubian complex tools found in Northeast Africa. Jeff Rose has been looking for evidence for Afro-Arabian links for a long time, working in places that are almost unimaginably difficult to conduct research, notes paleoanthropologist John Shee. These tools, carefully crafted stone points and scrapers, represent hundreds of thousands of years of technological development, refined techniques that give these early migrants a crucial advantage in their new environment. What happens next reveals the true scope of human adaptability. Rather than simply surviving, these migrants begin to thrive. They discover that many of the survival strategies that served them in Africa work even better in this green Arabia. Their knowledge of tracking animals, reading weather patterns, and finding water sources proves invaluable. More importantly, they begin to innovate, adapting their technology and techniques to take advantage of resources and opportunities that did and exist in their homeland. Not all of the groups that venture out of Africa during this period survive. There is some evidence that modern humans left Africa at least 125,000 years ago using two different routes through the Nile Valley. But the migrants who cross around 70,000 years ago are different. They're not just survivors. They're carrying with them the most advanced culture and technology that humanity has yet developed. Then, about 80,000 years ago, says Blombos archaeologist Henschelwood, modern humans entered a dynamic period of innovation. The evidence comes from such South African cave sites as Blombos, Clazy's River, Diepkloof, and Sibodu. These innovations include the world's first jewelry, evidence of long-distance trade, sophisticated hunting weapons, and perhaps most importantly, the cognitive and cultural tools needed to adapt to radically new environments. The success of this migration has consequences that extend far beyond simple survival. Their descendants spread along the coastal route, Arabia and the Persian Plateau, to India, which appears to have been the first major settling point. This coastal migration creates a human highway that will eventually connect Africa to Australia, establishing the first truly global human presence. Some evidence suggests that humans may have crossed the sea as early as 700,000 years ago, but it's these later migrants who established the lasting connections between continents. The journey from Africa to Arabia represents more than just a change of location. It is a fundamental transformation in human capabilities. For the first time in our species' history, humans prove they can not only survive, but flourish in environments completely different from their evolutionary homeland. This adaptability, this ability to thrive in the unknown, becomes the defining characteristic that will allow humans to eventually colonize every habitable environment on Earth. As these first successful migrants establish themselves on the Arabian Peninsula, they unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that will reshape the entire planet. Their children and grandchildren will push further into Asia, eventually reaching India, China, and Southeast Asia. Other groups will turn north, heading toward Europe and an eventual encounter with the Neanderthals. Still others will continue the coastal journey that will eventually lead to Australia and the first ocean crossings in human history. The crossing of the Red Sea marks the end of humanity, as African childhood and the beginning of our species' adolescence as a global force. From this point forward, there will be no turning back, no retreat to the familiar. Humanity has committed itself to a future of constant movement, endless adaptation, and the relentless push into every corner of the world. The great journey has begun, and there are no limits to where it might lead. Chapter 3. Crossing into Asia. The monsoon winds howl across the Arabian Peninsula as a small band of human pioneers stands at the edge of an ancient shoreline, gazing eastward toward the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. Behind them stretches 1,000 kilometers of green savannas and freshwater lakes, the bountiful Arabia that has sustained their people for generations. Ahead lies the ultimate unknown, the massive continent of Asia, wrapped in mystery and teeming with dangers and opportunities they can barely imagine. These are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the first humans to escape Africa, and they're about to embark on the next phase of humanity's greatest adventure. The year is approximately 65,000 BCE, and these migrants carry within their genes and culture the accumulated wisdom of a species that has already achieved the impossible. They've crossed an ocean, survived in alien lands, and proven that human adaptability knows no bounds. Now they stand poised to attempt something even more audacious: the colonization of the largest landmass on Earth. What they don't realize is that this journey will transform them in ways that will echo through thousands of generations, creating the genetic and cultural foundations of billions of people yet unborn. The coastal route that beckons them eastward offers both promise and peril. Their descendants spread along the coastal route around Arabia and Persia to South Asia before 55,000 years ago. following a maritime highway that hugs the shores of the Indian Ocean. This isn't just a journey. It's the creation of humanity's first global superhighway, a network of interconnected settlements that will eventually stretch from the Red Sea to the shores of Australia. According to this thesis, the dispersal was possible thanks to the development of a multi-purpose subsistence strategy based on the collection of organisms, fish, crustaceans, mollusks, algae, which are part of the biotic communities of the intertidal zone. The Asia these pioneers enter is a world unlike anything their species has ever encountered. Where Africa offered familiar landscapes and predictable seasonal patterns, Asia presents an overwhelming diversity of climates, terrains, and ecosystems. From the scorching deserts of western India to the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia, from the snow-capped mountains of the Himalayas to the vast river deltas of the Ganges and Mekong, this continent challenges every assumption about what environments humans can survive in. Each new landscape demands innovation, adaptation, and the kind of mental flexibility that will become humanity's greatest evolutionary advantage. The genetic evidence tells us that this migration was both swift and decisive. The group that crossed the Red Sea traveled along the coastal route around Arabia and Persia until reaching India, which appears to be the first major settling point. Geneticist Spencer Wells says that the early travelers followed the southern coastline of Asia, crossed about 250 kilometers, 155 miles of sea, and colonized Australia by around 50,000 years ago. The speed of this expansion is breathtaking. In just 15,000 years, these migrants and their descendants will travel over 10,000 kilometers, adapting to dozens of different environments and establishing the genetic foundations of every non-African population on Earth. India becomes the first great staging ground for Asian colonization. The migration route to East Asia must pass through the Indian subcontinent. Genetic diversity in present-day India is second only to that in Africa and implies settlements soon after humans left Africa. Here, in the river valleys and coastal plains of the subcontinent, early humans encounter their first taste of Asia's incredible diversity. The oldest definitively identified Homo sapiens fossils yet found in South Asia are Balangoda Man. Named for the location in Sri Lanka where they were discovered, they are at least 28,000 years old. But the genetic evidence suggests human presence much earlier, with populations establishing themselves across the region by 65,000 years ago. The challenges these early Asians face go far beyond simple survival. They must adapt to new diseases, unfamiliar food sources, and weather patterns that operate on completely different cycles than those they knew in Africa and Arabia. When humans started to spread to different parts of the world about 100,000 years ago, they encountered a variety of different climatic conditions and evolved new physical adaptations more suitable to those new climates. Recent DNA studies since 2007 confirm that genetic traits have changed or adapted to new environments during this time. In fact, the rate of change of DNA, and thus the rate of evolution, has accelerated in the last 40,000 years. The environmental pressures of Asia begin to shape human evolution in ways that will persist for tens of thousands of years. Populations in northern Asia and the Arctic tend to have broad, flat faces, as these reduce the effects of frostbite. The epicanthic fold common among northern and eastern Asian populations is an adaptation for protecting the eye from the hard-driving snow typical in these regions, and also to reduce snow glare. These adaptations don't happen overnight. They represent the accumulated genetic responses of hundreds of generations facing the unique challenges of Asian environments. Perhaps most remarkably, these early Asian migrants must learn to navigate and survive in environments that are actively changing around them. The period from 65,000 to 50,000 years ago coincides with significant climatic fluctuations as ice ages advance and retreat across the northern continents. Hominin groups encountered distinctly different environments, different plants and animals and foods, and different climatic conditions, a very wide range of temperature and strong variations in aridity and monsoonal rains. The ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions becomes a matter of life and death. The tools and technologies these migrants develop reflect their incredible adaptability. As they move through different environments, they modify their stone tool technologies to take advantage of local materials and respond to new challenges. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, had specialized tools to extract a variety of dietary resources. They also had broad social networks, as shown by the exchange of goods over a long distance. They used symbols as a means of communicating and storing information. These innovations allow them to exploit resources that other human species, like the Neanderthals, cannot access as effectively. The push eastward from India represents one of the most remarkable achievements in human history. The analysis by Shi et al. Suggests that humans arrived in southern East Asia around 60,000 years ago, and then proceeded north to occupy northern East Asia and Japan. This timeline compresses an incredible amount of adaptation and innovation into just a few thousand years. These migrants must learn to survive in tropical rainforests, cross major rivers, navigate complex island chains, and eventually face the challenge of surviving in the harsh winters of northern Asia. The diversity of environments these early humans encounter begins to drive the first major divergences in human populations outside Africa. Along the way, H. sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, with Denisovan DNA making 0.2% of mainland Asian and Native American DNA. These encounters represent more than just genetic mixing. They're evidence of complex interactions between different human species, exchanges of technology and cultural knowledge that enrich the genetic and cultural toolkit of modern humans. One of the most remarkable aspects of this Asian expansion is the speed with which these migrants adapt to maritime environments. Migration continued southeast on the coastal route to the straits between Sunda and Sahul, the continental landmass of present-day Australia and New Guinea. By reaching Australia, H. sapiens for the first time expanded its habitat beyond that of H. erectus. This achievement requires not just courage, but sophisticated seafaring technology and navigation skills that represent a quantum leap in human capabilities. The success of the Asian expansion hinges on more than just individual survival. It requires the development of increasingly complex social networks. Their flexible diet, probably containing meat, was aided by stone, tool-assisted foraging that allowed our ancestors to exploit a range of resources. These social innovations allow information, technologies, and resources to flow between widely scattered groups, creating a resilience that no individual band could achieve on its own. As these early Asians push further into the continent, they begin to encounter other human species that have been living in Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. At this eastern edge, they overlapped slightly in territory with another species that may also have covered a fair bit of ground, the Denisovans. These encounters are not always peaceful competition for resources. Territory and mates creates complex dynamics that will ultimately determine which human species survive and which disappear into extinction. The transformation that occurs during this Asian expansion is not just geographical, it's fundamentally evolutionary. The ability of early humans to adjust to changing conditions ultimately enabled the earliest species of Homo to vary, survive, and begin spreading from Africa to Eurasia. This flexibility, this willingness to abandon familiar ways of life in favor of new strategies better suited to new environments, becomes the defining characteristic of our species. By 60,000 years ago, these Asian pioneers have established human presence across a significant portion of the continent. From the tropical islands of Southeast Asia to the grasslands of Central Asia, from the river valleys of China to the steppes of Siberia, humans are learning to thrive in environments that would have been unimaginable to their African ancestors. They've proven that there are virtually no limits to human adaptability. a lesson that will serve their descendants well as they continue pushing into new worlds. The conquest of Asia represents more than just geographical expansion. It is the moment when humanity truly becomes a global species. The genetic, cultural, and technological innovations developed during this epic journey will provide the foundation for every subsequent human achievement. From the great civilizations of China and India to the maritime cultures of Southeast Asia, from the nomadic societies of Central Asia to the Arctic peoples of Siberia, all trace their origins back to these first brave souls who dared to cross into the unknown. As we stand at the threshold of the next chapter in human expansion, one thing is clear. There is no environment too harsh, no distance too great, no challenge too daunting for a species that has already proven it can adapt to anything the world can throw at it. The conquest of Asia is complete, but the greatest adventures still lie ahead. Chapter 4. The European Pioneers. The howling wind carries the bite of winter across the frozen steppes of Central Asia as a band of weathered hunters crests a ridge and gazes westward toward an unknown continent. Behind them lies thousands of kilometers of Asian wilderness scorching deserts, tropical forests, and windswept grasslands that their ancestors have conquered over millennia. Ahead, shrouded in mist and legend, lies Europe, a land of dense forests, bitter winters, and mysterious inhabitants who have already claimed this territory as their own. These pioneers don't know it yet, but they're about to attempt the most dangerous migration in human history. The year is approximately 45,000 BCE, and the world is locked in the grip of an ice age. Vast glaciers stretch across northern Europe like frozen seas, while the southern regions offer a landscape of harsh tundra and scattered forests. This is not the warm, inviting continent that will one day nurture the civilizations of Rome and Athens. This is a land where survival demands not just courage, but revolutionary innovations in technology, social organization, and sheer human ingenuity. These Asian migrants are about to become the first modern humans to successfully colonize Europe, and in doing so, they'll set the stage for one of the most consequential encounters in human history. The path to Europe has been anything but straightforward for these hardy travelers. The recent expansion of anatomically modern humans reached Europe around 40,000 years ago, from Central Asia and the Middle East, as a result of cultural adaptation to big game hunting of subglacial steppe fauna. They're part of a wave of migration that has been building for thousands of years, as human populations in Asia grew and began pushing into every available ecological niche. Some groups have tried to enter Europe before, following corridors along the Mediterranean coast or trekking through the river valleys of Eastern Europe. Most have failed, turning back in the face of impossible conditions or simply vanishing into the archaeological record. What makes this wave different is timing, technology, and sheer desperation. The first modern Homo sapiens to reach Europe more than 45,000 years ago faced much colder temperatures than had been thought, yet they slogged on and survived during one of the peaks of the last ice age. These aren't opportunistic wanderers following good weather. They're refugees from climate chaos in their Asian homeland, armed with cultural innovations that their predecessors lacked. They carry with them the world's most sophisticated hunting technologies, revolutionary clothing designs, and perhaps most importantly, the cognitive tools needed to survive in a world that seems designed to kill them. The Europe they're entering is already occupied. For nearly 300,000 years, this continent has been the domain of the Neanderthals, a robust, intelligent human species perfectly adapted to European conditions. The Neanderthals had larger brains and were larger overall with a more robust or heavily built frame, which suggests that they were physically stronger than modern Homo sapiens. Having lived in Europe for 200,000 years, they would have been better adapted to the cold weather. These are primitive cave dwellers, but sophisticated hunters who have developed complex tools, social structures, and even artistic traditions. They know every valley, every seasonal migration route, every source of shelter and food. By any reasonable measure, they should dominate any competition from these slim, warm climate newcomers. Yet the newcomers possess advantages that aren't immediately obvious. Cro-Magnons were generally more robust than most living populations, having larger brains, broader faces, more prominent brow ridges, and bigger teeth. But they also carried cultural innovations that would prove decisive. The anatomically modern humans known as the Cro-Magnons, with widespread trade networks, superior technology, and bodies likely better suited to running, would eventually completely displace the Neanderthals. Their secret weapons aren't just physical, they're cognitive and cultural. The first of these innovations is clothing technology that represents a quantum leap beyond anything previously achieved. When the first humans migrated to northern climates about 45,000 years ago, they devised rudimentary clothing to protect themselves from the cold. But everything changed around 30,000 years ago, with what anthropologist Brian Fagan argues is the most important invention in human history: the needle. Carved out of ivory or bone, with tiny eyes bored through by a fine-pointed flint drill, these Ice Age needles would be instantly recognizable today. They allowed for the manufacture of tight-fitting clothing that was tailored to the individual and often sewn together in layers, providing effective protection from the cold. But superior clothing is just the beginning. These European pioneers have also mastered fire technology in ways that their Neanderthal rivals haven't fully developed. With cold temperatures persisting at night, shelter was taken in dome-shaped huts partially dug into the earth. The framework was built from a latticework of mammoth bones, either hunted or raided from carcasses. On top of it, they delay sod or animal hides to make a house that was occupied for months on end. Inside these ingenious shelters, carefully tended fires could maintain comfortable temperatures even when the outside world was locked in Arctic conditions. Perhaps most importantly, these newcomers have developed hunting technologies that give them crucial advantages in the competition for Europe's scarce resources. One of the most important tools created during the Ice Age was the burin, a type of rock chisel used to cut grooves and notches into materials such as bones and antlers, allowing for the creation of intricate and lightweight spearheads and harpoon tips. These compound tool spears with detachable, interchangeable points allow hunters to carry multiple weapons on long expeditions and to adapt their hunting strategies to different prey. The weaponry they made covered an extraordinary range of specialized tools, most of which were made from grooving antler and bone. The social technologies these migrants bring are equally revolutionary. Language was arguably as important as anything else when it came to surviving the Ice Age. It allowed humans to share knowledge, whether regarding new technology, edible plants, or animal migrations. And through spoken language, as well as symbolic activities such as rituals, personal adornments, and art, our ancestors created a shared sense of social identity. These social networks extend far beyond individual hunting bands. Trade routes stretch hundreds of kilometers, allowing for the exchange of materials, ideas, and genetic diversity that keeps communities vibrant even in the harshest conditions. The encounter between these two human species, modern Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, plays out over thousands of years across the European landscape. Populations of modern humans and Neanderthal overlapped in various regions such as the Iberian Peninsula and the Middle East. Interbreeding may have contributed Neanderthal genes to Paleolithic and ultimately modern Eurasians and Oceanians. This isn't simple warfare or displacement. It's a complex dance of competition, cooperation, and cultural exchange that will reshape both species. Genetic evidence reveals the complexity of these interactions. From the extent of linkage disequilibrium, it was estimated that the last Neanderthal gene flow into early ancestors of Europeans occurred 47,000 to 65,000 years BP. The newcomers don't simply overwhelm the Neanderthals through superior numbers or violence. Instead, they slowly gain advantages through cultural innovations that allow them to exploit European environments more efficiently. Their elaborate toolkits, sophisticated clothing, and complex social networks give them just enough of an edge to outcompete their rivals in the struggle for survival. The success of these European pioneers comes down to adaptability, the same trait that has driven human expansion across Africa and Asia. Archaeological evidence suggests humans, whether Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon, reached sites in Arctic Russia by 40,000 years ago. But while Neanderthals could survive in these extreme environments, they couldn't thrive and expand the way the newcomers could. The modern superior ability to innovate, adapt, and organize allows them to push into ecological niches that remain close to their rivals. Climate plays a crucial role in determining the outcome of this species competition. However, from recent research, it is believed that the ecological crisis resulting from the eruption in c. 38,000 BCE of the supervolcano in the Phlegrean fields near Naples, which left much of Eastern Europe covered in ash, wiped out both the last Neanderthal and the first Homo sapiens populations of the early Upper Paleolithic. This volcanic catastrophe essentially resets European colonization, giving the more adaptable modern humans a fresh opportunity to establish dominance. Modern Europeans of today bear no trace of the genomes of the first Homo sapiens Europeans, but only of those from after the ecological crisis of 38,000 BCE. Modern humans then repopulated Europe from the east after the eruption and the ice age that took place from 38,000 to 36,000 BCE. The Europeans who emerged from this crisis carry the genetic and cultural heritage of populations that have proven they can survive literally anything the planet can throw at them. By 35,000 years ago, the transformation of Europe is complete. Neanderthals disappeared about 40,000 years ago, their last refuge being the Iberian Peninsula, where small populations cling to survival in mountain valleys, before finally succumbing to the changing world around them. The continent now belongs to the Cro-Magnons, whose descendants will create the cave paintings of Lascaux, the Venus figurines of Grevetian culture, and ultimately the civilizations that will define European history. The European conquest represents more than just another successful migration. It is proof that modern humans have become the ultimate generalist species. They've demonstrated they can outcompete specialized species like the Neanderthals even in environments where those species have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. This adaptability, this ability to innovate under pressure and cooperate across large social networks, marks the emergence of humanity as we know it today. As these European pioneers settle into their new homeland, they unknowingly establish the foundation for developments that will reshape human civilization. Their descendants will survive the remainder of the Ice Age, develop increasingly sophisticated cultures, and eventually create the agricultural societies that will give birth to the world's first cities. But all of that lies in the future. For now, they've achieved something remarkable enough. They've proven that no environment on Earth is beyond human reach, and no challenge too great for human ingenuity to overcome. The conquest of Europe is complete, but the human story is just beginning to unfold. Chapter 5. Island Hoppers. The horizon shimmers in the tropical heat as a group of weathered seafarers stands on the shores of Timor, gazing eastward across the vast blue expanse of the Indian Ocean. Behind them stretches the familiar landscape of Southeast Asia, a world of countless islands, dense jungles and navigable rivers that their ancestors have called home for thousands of years. Ahead lies the ultimate test of human ingenuity and courage, the open ocean, stretching endlessly toward a distant landmass that exists only in legend and hope. These pioneers are about to attempt something that no species in Earth's history has ever achieved. A deliberate crossing of nearly 100 kilometers of open sea to reach a completely unknown continent. The year is approximately 65,000 BCE, and these are not desperate refugees fleeing catastrophe. They are the world's first true mariners, master craftsmen, who have spent generations perfecting the art of ocean travel. Migrations continued along the Asian coast to Southeast Asia and Oceania, colonizing Australia by around 65,000 to 50,000 years ago. By reaching Australia, H. sapiens for the first time expanded its habitat beyond that of H. erectus. What makes this moment extraordinary is not just the distance they're preparing to cross, but the technological and cognitive revolution that has made such a journey possible. They're about to write the opening chapter of humanity's maritime age. The craft that will carry them across this watery void represents the pinnacle of Stone Age engineering. Since no land connection existed between Asia and Australia, Australia's people must have arrived by boat. The first human crossing by boats likely occurred across a 55-mile open sea from Indonesia to Australia around 65,000 years ago. These aren't crude logs lashed together in desperation. They're sophisticated bamboo rafts, carefully designed for ocean travel. The construction requires intimate knowledge of materials, engineering principles, and maritime conditions that represents thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. Building an ocean-worthy raft demands skills that earlier human species never developed. The craftsmen select only the largest, most buoyant bamboo canes, testing each piece for strength and water resistance. With stone knives, they could have felled Asia's giant bamboo and then tied the canes together to make a raft large enough to carry several passengers. The binding techniques use plant fibers twisted into rope, strong enough to hold the entire structure together in heavy seas. The raft's design incorporates principles of stability and buoyancy that won't be formally understood by engineers for tens of thousands of years. But technology alone cannot explain this achievement. The decision to undertake such a voyage requires cognitive abilities that set Homo sapiens apart from every other species on Earth. Using coastal view analysis and ocean drift modeling combined with population projections, we show that the probability of randomly reaching Sahul by any route is 5% until is greater than or equal to 40 adults are washed off an island at least once every 20 years. This isn't an accident or a lucky break. It is a calculated risk taken by people who understand ocean currents, weather patterns, and navigation well enough to bet their lives on their knowledge. The navigational skills these early mariners possess represent one of humanity's most remarkable intellectual achievements. As they set out from one island to the next, they could generally have spied at least a smudge of land on the far horizon. Yet their destination, the mysterious southern continent, lies beyond the range of sight, accessible only to those who can read the subtle signs that mark the presence of distant land. They navigate by watching the flight patterns of seabirds, interpreting the color and movement of clouds, and reading the complex patterns of ocean swells that indicate the presence of land masses beyond the visible horizon. The voyage itself is an ordeal that tests every aspect of human endurance and ingenuity. The movement from Africa to Australia culminated in a series of hazardous sea voyages across island Southeast Asia. Recent studies suggest the last voyage, potentially between Timor-Rodi and the northern Kimberley coast, would have involved advanced planning skills, 4 to 7 days paddling on a raft, and a total group of more than 100 to 400 people. For days, the voyagers battle ocean swells, scorching sun, and the constant threat of storms that could destroy their fragile craft in minutes. Water becomes the most precious commodity aboard these rafts. Despite being surrounded by ocean, the travelers face the constant threat of dehydration. They carry water in containers made from animal skins and gourds, carefully rationing every drop while fighting the psychological torment of thirst. Food supplies consist of dried fish, nuts, and fruits that can survive the ocean crossing without spoiling. Every meal must be calculated against the unknown duration of the journey ahead. The social organization required for such expeditions reveals the sophisticated planning abilities of these early humans. We conclude that anatomically modern humans had the capacity to plan and make open-sea voyages lasting several days by at least 50,000 years ago. Success depends not just on individual skills, but on complex coordination between navigators, paddlers, and lookouts. Leadership structures emerge naturally, with the most experienced seafarers taking command during critical moments. Decision-making becomes a matter of collective survival, as a single wrong choice can doom the entire group. When the first humans finally reach the shores of Australia, they encounter a continent unlike anything their species has ever experienced. The earliest dates for human occupation of Australia come from sites in the Northern Territory. The Majedbe rock shelter in Arnhem Land has a widely accepted date of about 50,000 years old, though some researchers argue for dates as early as 65,000 years. This is a land of giant marsupials, massive reptiles, and birds so large they could easily kill a human. Megalania, a monitor lizard the size of a small truck, dominates the landscape alongside marsupial lions and giant wombats that dwarf any mammals these new arrivals have ever encountered. The cognitive leap required to adapt to this alien environment cannot be overstated. These pioneers must learn to hunt completely unfamiliar prey using techniques that work in environments their ancestors never imagined. They develop new tool technologies specifically adapted to Australian conditions, creating the world's oldest ground-edge axes and developing sophisticated fire management techniques that will eventually reshape the entire continent's ecology. The success of the Australian colonization demonstrates capabilities that extend far beyond simple survival. Archaeological evidence shows that modern humans had reached Southeast Asia by 70,000 years ago, and that they had spread to Australia by at least 50,000 years ago. Within a remarkably short time, these maritime pioneers established settlements across the continent, from the tropical north to the temperate south. They adapt to deserts, rainforests, and coastal environments with equal facility, proving that human adaptability has virtually no limits. The genetic evidence tells an even more remarkable story. DNA studies have suggested that the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians belong to the southern root dispersal following the out-of-Africa exit, which expanded into the South and Southeast Asia region and subsequently diverged rapidly. These Australian populations become genetically isolated for tens of thousands of years, yet they maintain the essential human characteristics that allow for complex language, sophisticated technology, and social organization. The maritime skills developed during the Australian colonization don't end with reaching the continent. Over the following millennia, these seafaring peoples continue pushing the boundaries of ocean travel. Evidence of pelagic fishing from 42,000 years ago shows that humans were catching deep ocean fish like tuna, requiring boats capable of venturing far from shore and navigating back safely. More than 40,000 years ago, prehistoric humans living in what is now East Timor possessed the skills necessary to catch deep ocean fish such as tuna, proving that advanced maritime technology continued to evolve. The implications of these achievements extend far beyond Australia itself. The successful colonization of the continent proves that Homo sapiens has become the first truly global species, capable of adapting to any environment on Earth. The cognitive and technological innovations developed during this maritime expansion, advanced planning, sophisticated navigation, complex social coordination, and rapid environmental adaptation become the foundation for every subsequent human achievement. Perhaps most importantly, the Australian colonization demonstrates that humans have become a fundamentally different kind of species. While other animals are limited by their evolutionary adaptations to specific environments, humans have learned to remake themselves through culture and technology. They can transform from tropical forest dwellers into desert nomads, from riverine fishers into ocean voyagers, all within a single generation through the power of learning and innovation. The success of these early mariners also reveals the emergence of what might be called humanity's first age of exploration. Unlike the later European age of exploration driven by competition and commerce, this early maritime expansion is driven by pure human curiosity and the relentless urge to see what lies beyond the next horizon. These pioneers have no maps, no knowledge of what awaits them, and no guarantee of survival. They undertake these journeys because they can imagine possibilities beyond their current existence. The boat-building technologies pioneered during this period become the foundation for humanity's eventual mastery of the oceans. While the earliest watercraft are likely to have been rafts, as these make less demands on the woodworking skills of pre-Neolithic builders, the principles learned through raft construction eventually lead to more sophisticated designs. The understanding of buoyancy, stability, and navigation developed by these early maritime peoples provides the knowledge base for all subsequent naval architecture. The social innovations required for long-distance ocean travel also establish patterns that will shape human civilization for millennia to come. The coordination required for multi-day voyages necessitates new forms of leadership, cooperation, and collective decision-making. The trust required to embark on such journeys with others establishes bonds of mutual dependence that become the foundation for increasingly complex social organizations. As we look across the timeline of human achievement, the maritime colonization of Australia stands out as one of our species' most remarkable accomplishments. It represents the moment when humans transition from being just another terrestrial mammal to becoming the masters of sea and land alike. The descendants of these first Australian colonists will eventually develop some of the world's most sophisticated seafaring cultures, proving that the maritime innovations of 65,000 years ago were not a one-time achievement but the beginning of humanity's permanent relationship with the ocean. From this point forward, there will be no body of water too wide, no island too remote, no maritime challenge too daunting for human ingenuity to overcome. The age of the island hoppers has begun, and with it, humanity's transformation from a terrestrial species into the masters of the entire planet. The next great adventure, the colonization of the Americas, is still thousands of years in the future, but the foundation has been laid. Humans have proven they can cross any ocean, adapt to any environment, and thrive in any corner of the world that geography and physics will allow them to reach. Chapter 6. Into the Unknown. The Arctic wind howls across the vast expanse of the Bering Land Bridge, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of winter's approach. Stretching endlessly in every direction lies a desolate landscape of tundra and scattered shrubs, broken only by the occasional herd of mammoth moving like dark clouds across the horizon. Standing at the edge of this frozen wilderness, a small band of hardened hunters gazes eastward toward a horizon that holds both promise and peril. They cannot know it, but they are about to embark on the final great migration in human history, the colonization of the Americas, a journey that will take their descendants from the Arctic tundra to the tropical rainforests of the Amazon in just a few thousand years. These are not desperate refugees fleeing catastrophe, but the culmination of a process that has been building for millennia. It is believed that a small human population of at most a few thousand arrived in Beringia from eastern Siberia during the last glacial maximum before expanding into the settlement of the Americas sometime after 16,500 years before present. They represent the genetic and cultural synthesis of tens of thousands of years of human adaptation to some of Earth's harshest environments. Their ancestors have survived the bitter cold of Siberian winters, learned to hunt massive woolly mammoths, and developed technologies sophisticated enough to thrive in landscapes that would kill the unprepared in hours. The timing of their journey is determined not by human ambition, but by the slow pulse of planetary ice ages. For thousands of years, these people have been effectively trapped in Beringia, a vast landmass that connected Asia and North America when sea levels dropped during glacial periods. Genetic evidence supports a theory that ancestors of Native Americans lived for 15,000 years on the Bering Land, bridge between Asia and North America until the last ice age ended. During this time, they became genetically isolated from their Asian relatives, developing into a distinct population that would become the sole ancestors of every indigenous group in the Americas. The landscape they're preparing to enter represents the ultimate test of human adaptability. Where every previous human migration had led to environments with some familiar elements, the Americas offer a completely alien world. Beyond the ice-locked passages to the south lies a continent teeming with creatures that exist nowhere else on Earth. Ground sloths the size of trucks, saber-toothed cats with canine teeth longer than human hands, short-faced bears that stand 12 feet tall, and armadillo relatives the size of small cars. This is a land where the rules of survival must be rewritten from scratch. The route south is finally opening as the great ice sheets begin their retreat. According to geological evidence, thick glaciers blocked the land route from the Bering Land Bridge into North America until the glaciers started retreating around 15,000 to 14,000 years ago. Between the Laurentide ice sheet covering most of Canada and the Corduan ice sheet blanketing the western mountains, a narrow corridor is beginning to emerge, a lifeline through the frozen wasteland that will allow humans to reach the temperate regions beyond. But some pioneers aren't waiting for the inland route to fully open. The western coastline of North America was ice-free thousands of years earlier than the interior. These early Americans could have crossed the Bering Land Bridge on foot, then used simple boats to skirt around the glaciers and make their way down the west coast of North and South America. These coastal migrants, building on the maritime skills developed during the Australian colonization thousands of years earlier, began island hopping down the Pacific coast, establishing settlements on islands and coastal refugia that will one day be submerged when sea levels rise. The evidence for this remarkable expansion comes from sites scattered across 2 continents. The speed of this expansion suggests capabilities that go far beyond simple survival. All of the ancient genomes that have been sequenced carry the signature of rapid movement, the rapid divergence of different lineages in the Americas, suggesting that people were moving very quickly. It's harder to move that quickly on foot than by boat. These early Americans aren't just wandering randomly across the landscape. They were conducting a coordinated exploration and colonization effort that requires sophisticated planning, navigation, and communication across vast distances. The technologies that make this expansion possible represent the pinnacle of Ice Age innovation. The most visible legacy of these early Americans is the Clovis Point, a clinum masterpiece of stone tool technology that has never been surpassed for efficiency and lethality. The Clovis culture, known for its distinctive style of stone projectile points, roamed North America between 13,500 and 12,500 years ago. Chipped from jasper, chert, obsidian, and other fine, brittle stone, they have a lance-shaped tip and wickedly sharp edges, with shallow grooves called flutes that help the points be inserted into spear shafts. But Clovis points represent more than just superior tools. They are evidence of a revolutionary hunting strategy designed specifically for the megafauna of Ice Age America. Recent research suggests that instead of throwing spears, hunters likely planted their spears in the ground and waited for charging mastodons, bison, or even saber-toothed cats to impale themselves upon the fearsome spiked tips. This would have driven the spear much deeper into the animals, almost acting like a modern hollow-point bullet. This ancient Native American design was an amazing innovation in hunting strategies, providing a window into survival techniques used for millennia. The prey these hunters face is unlike anything their ancestors encountered. Proboscideans, predominantly mammoths, are the most common recorded species found in Clovis sites, followed by bison. But the Clovis culture hunted an extraordinary range of megafauna, including mastodons, giant ground sloths, American horses, camels, and even the massive short-faced bears that dominated the landscape. Isotopic analysis of the only known Clovis burial, the young child Anzac I from Montana, suggests that mammoths made up a large proportion, 35 to 40% of the total diet of his group. Hunting these massive creatures requires more than just superior weapons. It demands social organization and coordination on a scale never before achieved by human societies. Clovis peoples are thought to have been highly mobile groups of hunter-gatherers, creating campsites of considerable size and seasonally migrating vast distances following animal herds. The logistics of taking down a mammoth required dozens of hunters working in perfect coordination, followed by the massive undertaking of processing tons of meat, hide, and bone before spoilage sets in. The psychological impact of living alongside these giants cannot be underestimated. Imagine tracking a herd of mastodons across an open plain, knowing that a single mistake could result in being trampled by creatures weighing 6 tons. Picture facing down a short-faced bear standing 12 feet tall, or confronting a saber-toothed cat whose canine teeth are longer than butcher knives. These early Americans live in a world where humans are not yet the dominant species, where survival depends on outthinking predators that are bigger, stronger, and often more numerous. Yet somehow, these human pioneers not only survive, but thrive in this dangerous world. Within just a few thousand years, they establish populations from Alaska to Chile, adapting to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests. They develop specialized hunting techniques for different regions, create sophisticated social networks that span thousands of kilometers, and begin the process of environmental modification that will eventually reshape the entire landscape of the Americas. The environmental impact of human arrival in the Americas is immediate and dramatic. Beginning around 12,750 to 12,600 years BP, a massive extinction event sweeps across both continents. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, American horses, camels, and dozens of other species disappear forever. The relationship between human arrival and these extinctions remains controversial, but the timing is undeniable. Within a few centuries of human colonization, most of the American megafauna vanishes. Whether through hunting pressure, habitat modification, or the introduction of diseases, humans fundamentally alter the ecological balance of the Americas. The disappearance of these massive herbivores transforms grasslands into forests, eliminates key seed dispersers, and creates ecological niches that will be filled by smaller mammals. Humans don't just adapt to the American environment, they remake it entirely. The cultural diversity that emerges during this period is staggering. The end of the Clovis culture around 12,600 years ago gives rise to dozens of regional traditions, each adapted to specific environments and resources. The Folsom tradition in Central North America developed specialized techniques for hunting bison. Coastal peoples perfect maritime technologies for harvesting marine resources. Desert dwellers learn to extract every drop of moisture from arid landscapes. Mountain peoples develop high-altitude survival strategies. This rapid cultural diversification proves that humans have become the ultimate generalist species. Unlike other animals that are limited by their evolutionary adaptations, humans can remake themselves culturally to thrive in any environment. The same species that learned to hunt mammoths on the Great Plains develops techniques for fishing in Alaskan rivers, gathering nuts in California oak forests, and cultivating squash in Mexican highlands. The genetic legacy of these early Americans is equally remarkable. DNA evidence shows that despite their small founding population, These pioneers successfully established themselves across two continents without losing genetic diversity to dangerous bottlenecks. Their descendants will eventually number in the tens of millions, speaking hundreds of different languages and developing thousands of distinct cultural traditions. Perhaps most importantly, the colonization of the Americas represents the completion of humanity's global expansion. For the first time in Earth's history, a single species has successfully colonized every habitable continent. Humans have proven they can survive in any environment the planet offers, from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra, from coastal marshes to high mountain valleys. There is no longer any environment too harsh, any distance too great, or any challenge too daunting for human adaptability to overcome. As these early Americans push deeper into their new continent, they carry with them the accumulated wisdom of every human migration that came before. They possess the maritime skills developed during the Australian colonization, the cold weather technologies perfected in Europe and Siberia, the hunting strategies refined across Asia and Africa, and the social innovations that allowed humans to cooperate in groups large enough to tackle any challenge. The colonization of the Americas also represents something unprecedented in human history: the creation of a completely isolated population that will develop independently for thousands of years. Unlike every previous human expansion, which maintained some contact with neighboring populations, the American colonists are cut off from the rest of humanity when rising sea levels flood the Bering Land Bridge around 11,000 years ago. For the next 10,000 years, they will evolve culturally and genetically in complete isolation, creating societies and technologies that develop along completely different trajectories from those in the Old World. When European explorers finally re-establish contact in 1492, they will encounter civilizations as sophisticated as any in Europe: the Aztec and Inca empires, with their monumental architecture, complex agriculture, and millions of citizens. These achievements trace their origins back to the courage and ingenuity of those first pioneers who dared to cross the Bering Land Bridge and push into the unknown. Standing on the threshold of this great adventure, those first Americans cannot possibly imagine the legacy they're creating. They're simply trying to survive another day in a harsh world. But their journey into the unknown will complete humanity's transformation from a small, endangered African species into the dominant force on planet Earth. The conquest of the Americas represents the final chapter in the greatest adventure story ever told, the story of how humans learn to make every corner of our planet their home. Chapter 7: Tools, Fire, and Survival. The harsh African savanna stretched endlessly under the scorching sun, its golden grasslands rippling like waves in the hot wind. In this unforgiving landscape, a small group of early humans crouched around. A collection of stones, their calloused hands working with purpose and precision. One held a hammerstone high above his head, then brought it crashing down against a piece of flint. The sharp crack echoed across the plains as sparks flew, both literal sparks from the impact and metaphorical sparks that would ignite the greatest revolution in human history. This moment, repeated countless times across millennia, represents the foundation of everything that would follow. For it was here, in the marriage of tool-making and fire control, that our ancestors didn't just survive. They began to thrive. Imagine holding a simple piece of flint in your hand. To you, it's just a rock. But to an early human 2.9 million years ago, it was potential incarnate. The oldest known Oldowan tools have been found at Nyanga on the Homa Peninsula in Kenya and are dated to approximately 2.9 million years ago. These weren't the crude, random bashings you might expect from our distant cousins. They were deliberate, thoughtful creations that required genuine skill and understanding. The Oldowan tradition began with what archaeologists call choppers, stone cores with flakes removed from part of the surface, creating a sharpened edge that was used for cutting, chopping, and scraping. But here's what's truly remarkable. These early toolmakers weren't just making the choppers. They were also using the sharp flakes that came off in the process. Microscopic surface analysis of the flakes struck from cores has shown that some of these flakes were also used as tools for cutting plants and butchering animals. Picture the scene. An early human, perhaps Australopithecus gari or early Homo habilis, carefully selecting stones. Not just any stones. They needed the right hardness, the right texture, the right potential for fracture. They understood that different materials behaved differently. They knew that a hammerstone needed to be harder than the core they were. Shaping. This wasn't random violence against rock. This was applied physics, chemistry, and engineering rolled into one. For over 1 million years, this old-down technology dominated the world. Our ancestors carried these tools across continents, from the African highlands to the caves of Europe. But then, around 1.76 million years ago, something extraordinary happened. By about 1.76 million years ago, early humans began to strike really large flakes and then continued to shape them by striking smaller flakes from around the edges. The resulting implements included a new kind of tool called a hand axe. The Acheulean hand axe wasn't just a tool, it was a work of art masquerading as utility. These hand axes became more abundant in Mode II Acheulean industries that appeared in southern Ethiopia around 1.4 Maya. Unlike the simple choppers of the Old Down, hand axes were worked symmetrically and on both sides, creating bifacial tools that were as beautiful as they were functional. Hold a perfectly crafted Acheulean hand axe in your hands, and you're holding something that took genuine artistic vision to create. The maker had to envision the final form while looking at a rough piece of stone. They had to understand the internal structure of the rock, predict how it would fracture, and plan dozens of strikes in advance. The most sophisticated examples show bilateral symmetry around the length axis, with a thick proximal end, bud, and a thin, tapered distal end, tip. But perhaps most astoundingly, Lauren Isley calculated that Acheulean tools have an average useful cutting edge of 20 centimeters, 8 inches, making them much more efficient than the 5 centimeter, 2 in average of old Dowan tools. In engineering terms, our ancestors had quadrupled their cutting efficiency. They were innovating at a pace that would make modern tech companies jealous. The hand axe became the iPhone of the ancient world, so successful that hand axes dominated stone technology for some 1.66 million years. For comparison, modern humans have only existed for about 300,000 years. The hand axe had staying power that no modern technology can match. These weren't just tools for cutting and scraping. Most researchers think that hand axes were primarily used as cutting tools, but evidence suggests they were multifunctional instruments, the Swiss Army knives of prehistory. They could cut meat, process plant materials, dig roots, split bones for marrow, and even serve as weapons when necessary. The marriage of fire and stoneworking created a technological revolution that would define human civilization. Around 164,000 years ago in South Africa, our ancestors made a discovery that seems almost impossibly sophisticated for the time. Evidence dating to roughly 164,000 years ago indicates that early humans in South Africa during the Middle Stone Age used fire to alter the mechanical properties of tool materials, applying heat treatment to a fine-grained rock called silkrete. This wasn't accidental. Brown argues that the technique he and his team developed may help archaeologists determine when humans first used heat treatment. This is a bridging technology between control of fire and the later production of ceramics and metalworking. He says, our ancestors had figured out that heating certain stones to specific temperatures, around 259 degrees Celsius for blades, 413 degrees Celsius for flakes, would make them easier to shape and hold sharper edges. It requires a lot of planning, Brown says. It's not the kind of thing people would do with an ordinary cooking fire. Picture the sophistication this required. Building specialized fires, understanding temperature control, knowing exactly how long to heat different materials, and timing the cooling process perfectly. This was material science in the Stone Age. Even more recently, evidence from the Middle East shows that human ancestors did control fire at least 300,000 years ago. In the Middle East region, at Qesem Cave in Israel, archaeologists found that blades were heated to a lower temperature of 259 degrees Celsius than flakes, 413 degrees Celsius, while the pot lids were exposed to an even higher temperature of 447 degrees Celsius. This wasn't random heating. It was precise. Temperature control for different tool types. Fire changed everything about how humans survived. Before fire, our ancestors were just another species of African ape, vulnerable to predators, limited in diet, and restricted to warm climates. After fire, they became something entirely new. Cooking allowed a significant increase in meat consumption and calorie intake. But it wasn't just about nutrition. Cooked food could be stored longer, reducing the risk of starvation during lean times. It was soon discovered that meat could be dried and smoked by fire, preserving it for lean seasons. Fire became a weapon as well as a tool. Evidence shows that early hominids were able to corral and trap prey animals using fire. Imagine coordinated hunts where groups of humans would set controlled burns to drive massive herds of animals toward waiting hunters. Hominids also learned that starting bushfires to burn large areas could increase land fertility and clear terrain. To make hunting easier, protection was another crucial advantage. Fire was used to clear out caves before living in them, helping to begin the use of shelter. No longer did humans have to fear the massive cave bears or saber-toothed cats that lurked in rocky overhangs. Fire gave them the power to claim the best shelters for themselves. Most importantly, fire enabled global expansion. After the loss of body hair, hominids could move into much colder regions that would have previously been uninhabitable. The warm glow of a campfire could transform a freezing European winter night into a survivable environment. Fire was the technology that carried humans out of Africa and into every corner of the globe. But fire did more than just help humans survive. It transformed them socially and cognitively. The many uses of fire may have led to specialized social roles, such as the separation of cooking from hunting. Around the hearth, gender roles began to differentiate. Knowledge was shared, and the first stirrings of complex social organization emerged. The hearth became humanity's first social network. While the fire burned, stories were told, knowledge was passed down, and the bonds that would define human civilization were forged. Children learned not just how to make tools and control fire, but how to think, plan, and cooperate. The flickering flames illuminated not just the darkness, but the path to becoming fully human. Picture that scene again. The group of early humans around their fire, carefully crafted stone tools in their hands, the warm light dancing on their faces. They're no longer just surviving, they're beginning to thrive. In their hands, they hold the tools that will build cities. In their hearth burns the fire that will power civilization. And in their minds, already stirring, are the first inklings of language, art, and culture. This is where humanity truly begins. Not just with bigger brains or upright walking, but with tools in hand and fire at their command. The foundation stones of civilization were not grand monuments or written laws. They were the simple marriage of stone and flame, held together by human ingenuity and the irrepressible drive to not just survive, but to master the world around them. Chapter 8. Language. Picture a mother, somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago, holding her child close as the evening shadows lengthen around their campfire. The flames dance and flicker, casting warm light on their faces. She opens her mouth and something magical happens, not just sounds, but organized, meaningful sounds that carry ideas from her mind directly into her child's developing consciousness. Words flow like music, stories of the hunt, warnings about dangers, expressions of love, and complex instructions about survival. In that moment, something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth is taking place. This isn't the simple alarm call of a monkey warning about predators or the song of a bird defending its territory. This is language, the ultimate human weapon that would prove more powerful than any tool, more transformative than fire, and more revolutionary than agriculture. 4. Centuries. The greatest minds in human history have grappled with the riddle of language origins. Unlike fire-making or tool crafting, language leaves no fossil record, no archaeological trace, no stone implements to mark its passage through time. It exists purely in the ethereal realm of sound waves and neural patterns, making its evolutionary history one of science's most intriguing mysteries. The puzzle is so complex that in 1866, the Linguistic Society of Paris actually banned papers on the origin of language, declaring the topic too speculative for serious scientific inquiry. They couldn't have been more wrong. Language wasn't just another curious feature of human behavior. It was the foundation upon which all human civilization would be built. Little is known about the timing of language's emergence in the human species. Unlike writing, speech leaves no material trace, making it archaeologically invisible. But modern science has given us clues that our ancestors could never have imagined. The evidence comes from an unexpected source. Our genes, specifically a tiny instruction manual buried deep in our DNA called FOXP2. In 1990, researchers discovered something extraordinary in a British family known as the Key family. Half of the family members, 15 individuals, across 3 generations, suffered from a severe speech and language disorder called developmental verbal dyspraxia. Their speech was largely incomprehensible, marked by severe grammatical deficits and an inability to coordinate the complex mouth movements necessary for normal speech. When scientists traced the genetic cause, they discovered that all affected family members had a mutation in a single gene, FOXP2. This was the first gene ever discovered to be directly linked to language and speech disorders. FOXP2 was the first gene relevant to the human ability to develop language. A point mutation in FOXP2 co-segregates with a disorder in a family in which half of the members have severe articulation difficulties accompanied by linguistic and grammatical impairment. Think about what this means. Language, arguably humanity's most complex and sophisticated ability, could be disrupted by a change in just one tiny piece of genetic code. It was like discovering that the entire internet could be brought down by switching a single circuit. The implications were staggering. The FOXP2 gene provides instructions for making a protein that acts as a transcription factor, which means that it controls the activity of other genes. Researchers suspect that the FOXP2 protein may regulate the activity of hundreds of genes. The FOXP2 protein is active in several tissues, including the brain, both before and after birth, and appears to be essential for the normal development of speech and language. How did language actually begin? Scientists have proposed several competing theories, each with compelling evidence. The gestural theory states that speech was a relatively late development, evolving by degrees from a system that was originally gestural. The idea makes intuitive sense. Watch any human conversation, and you'll see hands moving constantly, painting invisible pictures in the air to accompany speech. Human ancestors were unable to control their vocalization at the time when gestures were used to communicate. However, as they slowly began to control their vocalizations, spoken language began to evolve. Evidence supports this progression. Gestural language and vocal language depend on similar neural systems, and the regions on the cortex that are responsible for mouth and hand movements border each other. Picture early humans around a campfire, their hands telling stories in the flickering light. They point to indicate direction, mime the movements of animals they've hunted, use facial expressions to convey emotions. Gradually, sounds begin to accompany these gestures, first grunts and exclamations, then more controlled vocalizations, until finally complex speech emerges. But there's another possibility. The combination theory suggests that language evolved through a combination of gestural and vocal communication. Early ancestors used hand gestures and vocalizations to convey meaning simultaneously. This multimodal approach might explain why even today, humans spontaneously use hand and facial gestures when formulating ideas to be conveyed in speech. What made human language possible wasn't just changes in our genes. It was the rewiring of our brains. The human brain developed specialized regions for language processing that are far more sophisticated than anything found in other animals. When researchers study sign language users, they find that the same left hemisphere brain regions were active during sign language as during the use of vocal or written language. This discovery revealed something profound. Language isn't tied to any specific mode of expression. It's a deeper cognitive capability that can express itself through voice, gesture, or even written symbols. Whatever message is being conveyed stems from the intrinsic properties of the signal in animal communication. But humans had transcended this limitation. The development of this neural architecture was revolutionary. Only humans can lose one modality, for example hearing, and make up for this deficit by communicating with complete competence in a different modality, i.e. signing. No other species has achieved this remarkable flexibility. Language required more than just brain changes. It demanded a complete reconstruction of human anatomy. Our ancestors underwent what amounts to a full-body makeover for communication. The ability to develop articulate speech relies on capabilities such as fine control of the larynx and mouth that are absent in chimpanzees and other great apes. The human vocal tract underwent dramatic changes. Our larynx descended, creating a longer vocal tract that could produce a much wider range of sounds. Our tongues became more muscular and flexible. Our lips gained unprecedented mobility. Even our breathing patterns changed to support the rapid airflow needed for speech. These changes came with costs. The descended larynx made humans more prone to choking, a deadly trade-off for the ability to speak. But the benefits were so enormous that natural selection favored these risky anatomical modifications. What made language such a powerful weapon? Unlike any tool that had come before, language could do something unprecedented. It could transmit precise information across time and space. A human could describe events that happened days ago in places far away to people who weren't there. They could share knowledge about animal behavior, weather patterns, food sources, and dangers. But language went far beyond simple information transfer. Human language is unique among all forms of animal communication in being compositional. Human language allows speakers to express thoughts in sentences comprising subjects, verbs and objects such as I kicked the ball and recognizing past, present, and future tenses. This compositional nature meant that humans could create an infinite number of new expressions from a finite set of elements. They could describe things that had never happened, imagine scenarios that might occur, and create entirely fictional stories. Language became the first virtual reality system, technology for creating shared mental worlds. Language transformed human society in ways that no other development ever would. Around the hearth, as families gathered after the day's work, language created something unprecedented, a collective consciousness. Stories, jokes, arguments, and planning sessions wove individual minds into a social fabric that was stronger than any material ever created. The development of syntax and grammar enabled the expression of abstract concepts, precise information, and more complicated ideas in early humans. Syntax likely emerged gradually as language evolved over generations. This wasn't just communication, it was the birth of culture itself. Children who grew up in this linguistic environment weren't just learning to speak. They were downloading the accumulated wisdom of their entire tribe directly into their developing minds. They learned not just what to think, but how to think. Language became humanity's first and most powerful educational technology. As humans migrated across the world, they formed separate communities that developed unique languages. Language became a way for people to express their cultural identity, with each language embodying the distinct outlooks, experiences, and customs of its speakers. The variety of languages led to the creation of various communication systems that further enhanced human cooperation and knowledge sharing. Using statistical methods to estimate the time required to achieve the current spread and diversity in modern languages today, Johanna Nichols, a linguist at the University of California, Berkeley, argued in 1998 that vocal languages must have begun diversifying at least 100,000 years ago. This meant that by the time humans were spreading across the globe, they were already equipped with this ultimate weapon. The development of different languages didn't divide humanity, it multiplied its capabilities. Each language group could develop specialized knowledge, unique technologies, and distinct cultural innovations. When these groups met and interacted, they could share and combine their discoveries, accelerating human progress exponentially. Today, there are more than 7,000 languages spoken globally, each with its own set of rules, vocabulary, and cultural importance. Every one represents a unique way of organizing human thought, a distinct lens through which to view and understand the world. Language continues to evolve and adapt. From the first tentative words spoken around African campfires to the global digital communications of today, language remains our species' ultimate tool for cooperation, innovation, and survival. That mother by the fire, teaching her child through words and stories, was wielding a weapon more powerful than any sword, more transformative than any machine. In her voice carried the accumulated wisdom of millennia, the hope of the future, and the key to everything that makes us human. Language didn't just help humans survive, it helped them transcend the limitations of individual consciousness and create something entirely new, a species that could think collectively, dream collectively, and build the future collectively. In the end, language wasn't just humanity's ultimate weapon. It was the foundation of human civilization itself. Chapter 9. The birth of agriculture in the misty dawn of a world awakening from the last ice age. A woman kneels beside a patch of earth in what would one day be called the Fertile Crescent. Her weathered hands hold a small collection of wild wheat seeds larger and more robust than any she has collected from nature before. These seeds didn't fall from shattering stalks as they should have. Instead, they remained firmly attached to their stems, waiting to be harvested. She doesn't know it yet, but in her palm rests the future of human civilization. This moment, repeated countless times across millennia around 12,000 years ago, represents one of the most profound transformations in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. Also called the Agricultural Revolution, this transition didn't happen overnight, nor did it occur because someone suddenly had a brilliant idea about planting seeds. It was a gradual, complex process that would fundamentally reshape not just how humans fed themselves, but how they lived, organized their societies, and viewed their relationship with the natural world. To understand the magnitude of this revolution, we must first appreciate the world that came before it. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors had been hunter-gatherers. living in small, mobile bands that rarely exceeded 20 to 30 people. They were, by necessity, experts in plant and animal biology. They knew which berries were safe to eat, where to find roots during different seasons, how to track animals across vast landscapes, and how to predict weather patterns that would affect their food sources. The archaeological site of Ohalo, too in Israel, provides a stunning glimpse into this pre-agricultural world. Located at the southern end of the Sea of Galilee, this 23,000-year-old site reveals grinding stones with traces of starch from wild cereals. Evidence shows that hunter-gatherers were already processing wild wheat and barley tens of thousands of years before agriculture emerged. They knew about cereals. They knew how to process them. They had the tools and the knowledge. So why did it take so long for agriculture to begin? The answer lies in a simple but profound truth. Hunting and gathering was a very comfortable way of life. These societies had leisure time, diverse diets, and remarkable freedom of movement. Archaeological evidence suggests that hunter-gatherers worked fewer hours per day than modern agricultural peoples and suffered less from malnutrition and disease. They had developed sophisticated ways of managing wild resources, including controlled burning, to encourage the growth of preferred plants and strategic hunting practices to maintain animal populations. Around 14,000 years ago, as the last ice age began to wane, conditions started to align for the most important transition in human history. The Earth entered a warming trend that created new ecological opportunities. In the Fertile Crescent, a boomerang-shaped region, bounded by the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf, wild wheat and barley began to flourish as temperatures rose and rainfall patterns shifted. But climate change alone didn't drive the agricultural revolution. Archaeological evidence reveals something more complex. Foragers took up farming under declining, not increasing, populations, and that the Neolithic agricultural revolution occurred not under conditions of climatic adversity, but instead under increasingly farming-friendly conditions, facilitating both plant growth and sedentism. This challenges the old notion that necessity was the mother of agricultural invention. Instead, it appears that people began farming when conditions became more favorable, not when they became desperate. The warming climate didn't force agriculture. It enabled it. In this warming world, a culture called the Natufians emerged around 12,500 years ago in the Levant. These people represent a crucial bridge between hunter-gatherer and agricultural societies. The Natufians were still primarily hunter-gatherers, but they began doing something unprecedented. They settled down. Natufian sites revealed the first permanent villages, complete with round stone houses, storage facilities, and elaborate burial grounds. They built grinding stones permanently into the floors of their homes and developed specialized tools for harvesting wild cereals. They were essentially hunter-gatherers who had chosen to stay in one place and intensively exploit the resources around them. Archaeological evidence shows that their diets consisted largely of gazelle meat supplemented by wild cereals that they collected and possibly began to cultivate in small plots around their settlements. But they remained dependent on hunting and gathering for most of their food. They were experimenting with a new way of life, testing the boundaries between wild and domestic, mobile and settled. What exactly happened when wild plants became crops? The process was more subtle and complex than simply planting seeds and hoping for the best. Domestication required specific genetic changes that made plants more useful to humans, but less capable of surviving in the wild. The most critical change involved seed dispersal. Wild cereals have shattering spikes. When the grain is ripe, the seeds automatically separate and scatter on the ground, ensuring the plant's reproduction. But this trait makes harvesting incredibly difficult. You can spend hours carefully approaching a patch of wild wheat, only to have it scatter its seeds at the slightest touch. Occasionally, genetic mutations produce plants with non-shattering, spike seeds that remain firmly attached to the stem even when ripe. In the wild, this was usually a death sentence for the plant, since its seeds couldn't disperse naturally. But for human harvesters, these mutant plants were treasures. They could be harvested efficiently, and their seeds could be saved for planting. Archaeological evidence shows that genetic mutations for indehiscent spikes increased in frequency in a small number of wild grass species, firstly in the progenitors of the primary domesticates barley, einkorn wheat, and emmer wheat, approximately 10,000 BP. The transition wasn't immediate. It likely took hundreds or even thousands of years for these traits to become fixed in cultivated populations. Cereal and pulse crops eventually achieved on average 50% higher yields than their wild progenitors, resulting from a 40% greater final plant size, 90% greater individual seed mass, and 38% less chaff or pod material. But this productivity advantage came slowly, and there's growing evidence that early farming may not have been more productive than hunting and gathering, at least not initially. Agriculture didn't arise randomly across the globe. It emerged independently in only a few special locations, each with unique environmental conditions that made plant and animal domestication feasible. The Fertile Crescent was the first and perhaps most important of these centers. Wheat and barley were already grown 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, a sickle-shaped region stretching from present-day Iraq and Iran through Turkey and Syria into Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. The region provided the perfect combination of wild ancestors for major crops, diverse topography that allowed experimentation with different growing conditions, and seasonal patterns that made storage and planning essential. Archaeological sites like Jericho, Abu Huraira, and Cataluyuk reveal the gradual transition from modified hunting and gathering to full agricultural dependence. At Cataluyuk in southern Turkey, archaeologists have uncovered more than a dozen mud brick dwellings in a 9,500-year-old settlement that may have housed as many as 8,000 people. The houses were clustered so closely back to back that residents had to enter through holes in the roof. The archaeological evidence shows a complex pattern of adoption. Wild barley has been found in several pre-agricultural, pre-pottery Neolithic sites, with the earliest evidence coming from Ohio II, where 21,000-year-old wild remains were found in large amounts. This supports the conclusion that wild barley had been collected from nature long before domestication began. But the transition to dependence on cultivated crops was gradual. It may have taken humans hundreds or even thousands of years to transition fully from a lifestyle of subsisting on wild plants to keeping small gardens and later tending large crop fields. Agriculture in the Fertile Crescent wasn't just about cereal crops. The region witnessed the simultaneous domestication of what archaeologists called the found-a-crop package, a suite of plants and animals that together created a sustainable agricultural system. Along with wheat and barley came lentils, peas, chickpeas, and flax, providing protein, oils, and fiber. Animals joined the agricultural revolution through a parallel process. Cattle, goats, sheep, and pigs all have their origins as farmed animals in the Fertile Crescent, with dates for their domestication ranging from between 13,000 to 10,000 years ago. These animals provided not just meat, but what archaeologist Andrew Sherratt called secondary products: milk, wool, leather, and eventually labor. Genetic studies show that goats and other livestock accompanied the westward spread of agriculture into Europe, helping to revolutionize Stone Age society. At some point during the spread of farming into southeastern Europe, a mutation occurred for lactose tolerance that increased in frequency through natural selection, thanks to the nutritional advantages of being able to digest milk. throughout life. The combined package of cereals, legumes, and livestock created a synergistic system. Cereal crops provided carbohydrates and some protein, but were deficient in certain amino acids. Legumes fixed nitrogen in the soil, improving fertility while providing protein rich in the amino acids lacking in cereals. Animals could graze on crop stubble and weeds, converting inedible plant matter into high-quality protein while providing fertilizer for the fields. Agriculture didn't just change what people ate, it transformed how they lived together. Hunter-gatherer societies had been largely egalitarian, with minimal material differences between individuals and flexible, fluid social organization. But farming created new possibilities for inequality, conflict, and social stratification. 4. The first time in human history, people could accumulate substantial surpluses of food and other goods. Storage technologies, pottery, granaries, and preservation techniques allowed communities to save food for lean times, but they also created the possibility of hoarding and unequal distribution. Archaeological sites from this period show increasing evidence of social differentiation, with some burials containing far more grave goods than others. The seasonal nature of farming also created new temporal rhythms. Hunter-gatherers had lived in an eternal present, responding to immediate opportunities and challenges. Farmers had to plan months and years ahead, coordinating planting, tending, and harvesting activities across entire communities. This required new forms of social organization, leadership, and decision-making. Property rights became crucial in ways they had never been before. Mobile hunter-gatherers could claim temporary use rights to resources, but farmers needed long-term, exclusive access to specific plots of land. The development of private property rights may have been a necessary precondition for the agricultural revolution, providing the security that made long-term investment in land improvement worthwhile. One of the most profound effects of agriculture was demographic. Hunter-gatherer populations had remained relatively stable for hundreds of thousands of years, limited by the carrying capacity of their environments and the mobile lifestyle that made raising multiple children difficult. Agriculture shattered these constraints. Settled communities could support much larger populations, and agricultural work could productively employ children as well as adults. Women could have children more frequently since they no longer needed to carry infants during constant migrations. From some 5 million people 10,000 years ago, the global population rocketed to 8 billion today, an increase made possible by agriculture. But population growth also created new pressures. As agricultural communities expanded, they came into contact and conflict with hunter-gatherer groups and with each other. The need to defend agricultural investments, stored food, improved land, permanent structures may have contributed to the development of warfare and militaristic societies. Despite its revolutionary importance, the agricultural transition came with costs that we're still grappling with today. Skeletal evidence shows that early farmers were generally shorter, less healthy, and more disease-prone than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. The shift to a diet dominated by a few cereal crops reduced nutritional diversity and made populations vulnerable to famine when crops failed. Increased population density and contact with domesticated animals created new opportunities for infectious diseases to emerge and spread. Many of the epidemic diseases that have plagued human societies, influenza, measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, likely emerged during the agricultural transition as people began living in close contact with animals and in larger, denser communities. The relationship between humans and nature also fundamentally changed. Hunter-gatherers had seen themselves as part of the natural world, subject to its rhythms and constraints. Farmers began to see nature as something to be controlled, modified, and improved. This shift in consciousness may have been as important As any technical innovation in creating the modern world, the agricultural revolution wasn't a single event that spread from one center. Archaeological evidence shows that agriculture was independently invented in at least 7 different regions around the world. The Fertile Crescent, China, 2 separate centers, New Guinea, Eastern North America, Mesoamerica, the Andes, Amazonia, and Eastern Africa. Morphological and genetic evidence suggests that corn, or maize, was first domesticated from the wild grass teosinte in southern Mexico as early as 7000 BC. Over the next several thousand years, corn made its way north, appearing on the Colorado Plateau by about 2200 BC. Rice and millet farming developed independently in China during the same Neolithic period, with the world's oldest known rice paddy fields discovered in eastern China, revealing evidence of ancient cultivation techniques such as flood and fire control. Each center developed its own unique package of crops and animals adapted to local conditions. In Mesoamerica, the 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash, provided a nutritionally complete and environmentally sustainable agricultural system. In the Andes, potatoes and llamas formed the basis of high-altitude agriculture. In China, rice in the south and millet in the north supported dense populations that would become the foundation of Chinese civilization. The transformation from hunting and gathering to agriculture wasn't a sudden revolution, but a long, complex process that played out over thousands of years. Evidence indicates that the inhabitants of sites like Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers who supplemented their diet with early forms of domesticated cereal and lived in villages for at least part of the year. The process involved multiple stages: collecting wild resources more intensively, protecting and encouraging wild plants, beginning to plant saved seeds, selecting for useful traits, and finally becoming dependent on cultivated crops. Different communities made these transitions at different rates and in different ways, creating a complex mosaic of subsistence strategies across the landscape. Some groups remained hunter-gatherers by choice even when agricultural peoples lived nearby, suggesting that the transition wasn't inevitable or universally beneficial. Others adopted farming but maintained significant hunting and gathering activities as supplements to their cultivated crops. Despite its costs and complications, the agricultural revolution created the foundation for everything that would follow in human history. The food surpluses generated by farming freed some people to pursue specialized crafts, trade, scholarship, and governance. The need to coordinate agricultural activities across large communities drove innovations in organization, communication, and technology. Cities, writing, mathematics, metallurgy, and monumental architecture all emerged from agricultural societies. The great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and the Americas were all built on agricultural foundations. Even today, as we stand on the threshold of a digital age, agriculture remains the bedrock of human civilization. That woman kneeling in the Fertile Crescent, holding those precious, non-shattering seeds, couldn't have imagined the world her actions would help create. She was simply trying to feed her family and community more reliably. But in her choice to save and plant those seeds, she became part of a transformation that would remake the planet and define the trajectory of human civilization for the next 12,000 years. The birth of agriculture wasn't just about learning to grow food. It was about humanity learning to reshape the world to meet its needs. It was the first step on a journey that would lead from scattered bands of hunter-gatherers to the complex, interconnected global civilization we inhabit today. And it all began with a handful of seeds and the revolutionary idea that humans could do better than simply accept what nature provided. As we reach the end of this extraordinary journey through humanity's earliest chapters, take a moment to consider the remarkable transformation we've witnessed. We began with our ancestors taking their first tentative steps out of Africa, armed with nothing but primitive tools and an unquenchable curiosity about the world beyond the horizon. We followed them as they discovered fire, developed language, invented agriculture, and built the first cities. Each breakthrough fundamentally reshaping what it meant to be human. From the Great Migration that scattered our species across the globe to the rise of Uruk's towering walls, we've seen humanity's greatest superpower in action: our ability to adapt, innovate, and cooperate on scales that no other species has ever achieved. The same drive that pushed our ancestors across frozen continents and vast oceans eventually led them to create civilizations that could feed millions, record knowledge for posterity, and build monuments that still inspire us today. These weren't just random events, they were the foundation stones of everything that followed. The tools our ancestors crafted in African workshops evolved into the technologies that power our modern world. The languages they developed around ancient hearths became the vehicle for every poem, treaty, and scientific discovery in human history. The agricultural revolution they pioneered still feeds us today. The first cities they built established the principles of urban life that billions now call home. But perhaps most importantly, we've seen that progress was never inevitable. At every crucial juncture, from the development of language to the invention of writing, human ingenuity faced down seemingly impossible challenges and found ways to transcend the limitations that had constrained every other species. Our ancestors didn't just survive, they imagined better futures and then built them, one innovation at a time.